At 52, Victoria had earned every thread of her tailored Chanel suit and every zero in her bank account. Her dark skin had a healthy glow from her morning yoga routine, and her natural hair was styled in an elegant updo that spoke of both sophistication and self-assurance. As she approached the Aston Martin, she noticed the subtle shift in the atmosphere. The handful of customers browsing the showroom, mostly middle-aged white men in expensive suits, paused their conversations to watch her. Their gazes held that familiar mix of curiosity and judgment she'd grown accustomed to over the years. A salt-and-pepper-haired man in a Brioni suit actually took a step back from the Maserati he'd been examining, as if her presence somehow diminished the exclusivity of the space. Victoria allowed herself a small, knowing smile. She'd seen it all before, the sideways glances, the barely concealed surprise when she walked into high-end stores or exclusive restaurants. After building the Bennett Financial Group from the ground up, she learned to let such reactions roll off her back like water from a duck's feathers. The Aston Martin's paint job was even more impressive up close. Victoria ran her fingers along the smooth curve of the hood, appreciating the craftsmanship that went into every detail. The car represented more than just luxury. It was a testament to excellence, to the pursuit of perfection, values she'd instilled in both her company and her son. "Can I help you?" The voice that interrupted her reverie was carefully neutral, but carried an undercurrent of skepticism. Victoria turned to find a tall man in his early 60s regarding her with pale blue eyes that seemed to be searching for something amiss in her appearance. "Blake Thompson," he introduced himself with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I own Elite Motors." He stood with the easy confidence of someone used to being the most important person in any room. Victoria extended her hand. "Victoria Bennett. I'm interested in the DB11. Blake's handshake was perfunctory, his attention already seeming to drift. "Ah yes, beautiful car. Though perhaps I could show you something more suitable." His emphasis on the last word carried volumes of meaning. "The DB11 is exactly what I'm looking for," Victoria replied firmly, maintaining eye contact. "I'd like to see the specs and discuss pricing." A flicker of amusement crossed Blake's face. "Madam, this particular model starts at just over $200,000. He spoke slowly, as if explaining something to a child. "We do have some excellent pre-owned vehicles in our secondary location across town that might better align with your budget." The showroom had grown quieter, other customers pretending not to listen while hanging on every word. Victoria felt a familiar heat rising in her chest. Not embarrassment, but the slow burn of righteous anger she'd learned to channel productively over the years. "Mr. Thompson," she began, her voice carrying the authority that had helped her close billion-dollar deals, "I'm quite aware of the price point. I'm also aware that this model's handling is superior to the Bentley Continental GT, and its 0 to 60 time beats the Mercedes-AMG GT by a full second. Now, shall we discuss the vehicle I'm interested in purchasing, or should I take my business to your competitor across town?" Blake's expression hardened, the veneer of professional courtesy cracking to reveal something uglier underneath. "Listen," he said, stepping closer and lowering his voice. "I've been in this business for 30 years. I know time wasters when I see them. This is a prestigious establishment, and I have serious customers to attend to." He gestured vaguely toward the other patrons, who quickly averted their eyes. Victoria stood her ground, even as Blake invaded her personal space. "I am a serious customer, Mr. Thompson, though I'm beginning to question whether this is a serious establishment." "Security!" Blake's voice rang out across the showroom. A burly man in a dark suit appeared almost immediately. "Please escort this person out. She's causing a disturbance." Victoria didn't move. "I'm causing a disturbance by attempting to purchase a car?" "You're trespassing," Blake snapped, pulling out his phone. "And if you don't leave immediately, I'm calling the police." "Go ahead," Victoria replied calmly, though her heart was racing. "I'd be very interested to hear you explain to them why you're removing a potential customer from your showroom." Blake was already dialing. "Yes, police? I have an unwanted individual refusing to leave my property. She's being aggressive and threatening my staff." The lies rolled off his tongue with practiced ease. Victoria could hardly believe what she was hearing. She'd faced discrimination before, but this level of blatant prejudice was stunning. As she opened her mouth to protest, the security guard grabbed her arm roughly. "Don't touch me," she said firmly, pulling away. "I'll wait right here for the police. I'm sure they'll be very interested in the security footage of this interaction." She nodded toward the cameras mounted in the corners of the showroom. Blake's face reddened. "Those cameras are decorative. There's no footage." "How convenient," Victoria replied. Just as the first police cruiser pulled up outside, its lights reflecting off the pristine vehicle surrounding them. Two officers entered the showroom, their hands resting casually on their weapons. Victoria's heart sank as she saw them immediately defer to Blake, who launched into his version of events before anyone could ask a question. "This woman has been harassing my customers and refusing to leave," Blake said, his voice dripping with false concern. "I've asked her repeatedly to exit the premises." "That's absolutely false," Victoria began, but one of the officers was already reaching for his handcuffs. "Ma'am, please put your hands behind your back." Victoria felt the cold metal close around her wrists, the ultimate indignity in a morning that had spiraled beyond her wildest expectations. As they let her out past the luxury cars she could have bought 3 times over without blinking, she held her head high, even as her eyes stung with tears of fury. The other customers watched in silence, their faces a mixture of discomfort and indifference. Blake Thompson stood in the center of his domain, a satisfied smile playing at the corners of his mouth as he watched Victoria being led away. As she was guided into the back of the police cruiser, Victoria's mind was already racing ahead. She thought of her son, Marcus, and the lessons she'd taught him about dignity in the face of injustice. She thought about all the other people who must have faced similar treatment in places like Elite Motors, people who perhaps didn't have the resources or confidence to fight back. The police car pulled away from the curb, and Victoria caught one last glimpse of the Aston Martin through the showroom windows. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Blake Thompson had no idea who he'd just humiliated, but he was going to find out. As the car turned the corner, Victoria closed her eyes and began to plan. She'd built an empire from nothing, raised a brilliant son on her own, and broken through countless barriers. This was just another obstacle to overcome, another battle to fight. And Victoria Bennett had never backed down from a fight. The police cruiser merged into traffic, carrying her away from Elite Motors, but toward an unexpected confrontation that would change not only her life, but the lives of countless others. As the city rolled past the window, Victoria's determination hardened into resolution. Blake Thompson's actions wouldn't go unanswered, and his education in the true cost of prejudice was about to begin. The rhythmic motion of the police cruiser lulled Victoria into a contemplative state, each passing streetlight casting leading shadows across her face. Her handcuffed wrists rested in her lap, a temporary indignity that sparked memories of other battles fought and won. Through the partitions separating her from the officers, she could hear fragments of their radio chatter, but her mind was already excavating deeper layers of her past, searching for the strength that had carried her through countless challenges. 25 years earlier, she'd sat in a different kind of darkness, the kind that came from having nothing but hope and determination. In those days, her small apartment above Mrs. Rodriguez's flower shop had been her entire world. The space barely contained a bed, a crib for baby Marcus, and a folding table where she spread her accounting textbooks late into the night. The ceiling leaked when it rained, creating a symphony of drips that she'd catch in a collection of mismatched pots and pans, the water's rhythm keeping time with her studies. She remembered one particular night when Marcus was teething, his cries piercing through her concentration as she prepared for her CPA exam. The textbook pages had blurred before her eyes, numbers dancing in her vision as exhaustion threatened to overwhelm her. But giving up had never been an option. She'd cradled Marcus in one arm, balancing her flashcards in the other, swaying back and forth as she memorized tax codes and accounting principles. The memory brought an unexpected smile to her face, even in the confines of the police car. Those nights had forged something unbreakable in her, a steel core that no amount of prejudice or discrimination could melt. She'd worked as a junior accountant during the day, taking on extra bookkeeping jobs in the evenings while her elderly neighbor watched Marcus. Every dollar earned went toward their future, Marcus's education fund, her law school applications, the dream of something greater than their cramped apartment and hand-me-down furniture. The police cruiser turned onto Central Avenue, passing the gleaming towers of the financial district. Victoria's eyes traced the familiar outline of the Bennett Financial Group headquarters, 40 stories of glass and steel that rose like a testament to perseverance. She remembered the day she'd signed the lease on her first office, a tiny space with secondhand furniture and a window that looked out onto a brick wall. Marcus had been 7 then, already showing signs of the brilliant mind that would later make him one of the city's most respected attorneys. That first office had smelled of mold and instant coffee, but to Victoria, it had been paradise. She'd worked 18-hour days, building her client base one referral at a time. When other financial advisors dismissed her or tried to poach her clients, she doubled down on her commitment to excellence. Her reputation grew steadily. The advisor who never cut corners, who treated every client's money as if it were her own, who could spot an investment opportunity others missed. The car passed another intersection, and Victoria caught sight of her reflection in the window. Older now, certainly, but with the same fire in her eyes that had driven her to study law at night while building her business during the day. She remembered the skeptical looks from her professors, the whispered comments from classmates who assumed she was there to fill some diversity quota. They hadn't known about the nights she'd spent poring over case law while Marcus slept on the couch in her office, or the mornings she'd presented investment strategies to clients before rushing to her constitutional law class. Marcus had watched it all, absorbing every lesson she hadn't needed to speak aloud. He'd inherited her drive, her precision, and her unwavering sense of justice. While other mothers worried about their teenagers falling in with the wrong crowd, Victoria's concern had been that Marcus worked too hard, driven by the example she'd set. He graduated high school at 16, college at 20, and law school at 23, collecting honors and accolades that filled her heart with pride even as she reminded him that true success was measured in lives changed, not awards received. The police car hit a pothole, jolting Victoria back to the present moment. The handcuffs bit into her wrists, a sharp reminder of Blake Thompson's casual cruelty. But even this indignity was transmuting itself into fuel for what would come next. She thought of all the others who must have walked into Elite Motors over the years. People with dreams and money to spend turn away because they didn't fit Blake's narrow vision of success. Through the window, Victoria watched the city scroll past like a flipbook of her life's journey. There was the park where she'd taken Marcus to play when she couldn't afford any other entertainment. The community college where she'd started her education, taking night classes while working full-time. The bank that had rejected her first business loan application, forcing her to bootstrap her company with savings and determination alone. Each landmark was a chapter in her story, a reminder of obstacles overcome and barriers broken. The handcuffs around her wrists were just another chapter waiting to be written. Blake Thompson thought he was dealing with a random woman he could dismiss and humiliate. He had no idea he'd just challenged someone who had turned adversity into advantage her entire life. Victoria's mind began to race with possibilities. The security cameras Blake claimed were decorative. She'd bet her last dollar they were functional. The other customers who'd witnessed everything, their discomfort could be channeled into testimonies. The police officer's quick acceptance of Blake's version of events, that, too, would be documented and examined. As the police car approached the station, Victoria began mentally drafting the strategy that would transform this morning's humiliation into an opportunity for change. Marcus would be furious when he heard about this, but she'd taught him to channel anger into action, to fight injustice with intelligence rather than rage. Together, they would craft something meaningful from this incident, something that would make Blake Thompson wish he'd never heard the name Bennett. The car slowed to a stop, and Victoria straightened her shoulders, ignoring the bite of the handcuffs. She thought of her mother's favorite saying, "Steel is forged in fire, baby girl." Today's fire would forge something powerful, not just justice for herself, but a reckoning for every person who'd ever been judged by the color of their skin rather than the content of their character or their bank account. As the officer opened the car door, Victoria stepped out with the same dignity she'd maintained in the showroom. The station's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, but she hardly noticed. Her mind was already racing ahead, plotting moves and counter-moves like the chess game she'd taught Marcus to play. Blake Thompson had just made the opening move in a game he didn't even know he was playing. The booking officer looked up as she approached, his expression shifting from bored to curious as he took in her designer's suit and composed demeanor. Victoria met his gaze steadily, already formulating the statement she would give, every word chosen to lay the groundwork for what was to come. This was more than just an incident of discrimination at a luxury car dealership. This was an opportunity to expose the subtle and not-so-subtle barriers that still existed in supposedly progressive spaces. Blake Thompson had unknowingly provided her with a platform, and Victoria Bennett had never been one to waste an opportunity. As she waited to be processed, Victoria began mentally composing the message she would send to Marcus. Her son had inherited her strategic mind and her passion for justice, but he'd also learned from her the importance of timing, of building an ironclad case before Maki. In a move, together, they would transform this morning's humiliation into a catalyst for change. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, their steady drone a counterpoint to the station's activity. Victoria stood perfectly still, her mind racing with possibilities. She thought of the Aston Martin in the showroom, its silver paint gleaming under the perfect lighting. Soon enough, she would own that car. But more importantly, she would own the story of how Blake Thompson's prejudice had backfired in spectacular fashion. The booking officer called her name, and Victoria stepped forward, her heels clicking against the linoleum floor with the same confidence they'd had on Elite Motors' marble tiles. This was just the beginning of a story that would ripple far beyond a single showroom or a single morning. Blake Thompson had no idea what he'd set in motion, but he would learn. They would all learn that some people were simply too determined to be dismissed. As Victoria completed the booking process, her fingerprints pressing against the cold scanner, a familiar voice cut through the station's ambient noise. "Mom!" The word carried equal measures of concern and contained fury. Marcus Bennett stood in the doorway, his 6'2" frame filling the space with the same commanding presence Victoria had worked to instill in him since childhood. His charcoal Tom Ford suit bore the slight rumpling of someone who'd left an important meeting in a hurry, and his normally composed features were tight with tension. "What happened?" he asked, though his clenched jaw suggested he already knew. His eyes fixed on the handcuffs still binding his mother's wrists, and something dangerous flickered in his dark eyes. The booking officer looked between mother and son, recognition dawning on his face. Marcus Bennett's reputation preceded him. The youngest partner at Hamilton, Wright and Associates, known for taking on and winning impossible cases. The officer's demeanor shifted subtly, becoming more solicitous as he hurried to remove Victoria's handcuffs. "Mr. Bennett," he started, "we weren't aware." "Save it." Marcus cut him off, his voice carrying the precise control that had made him feared in courtrooms across the state. "I want copies of all documentation related to this arrest. Everything, including the names and badge numbers of the arresting officers." Victoria rubbed her wrists, watching her son with a mixture of pride and concern. She'd raised him to fight injustice, but she'd also taught him the importance of strategic patience. Right now, she could see him struggling to contain the rage that threatened to overwhelm his professional demeanor. "Marcus," she said softly, the same tone she'd used when he was a child, throwing tantrums over perceived unfairness. "Let's discuss this somewhere private." He nodded sharply, already pulling out his phone to send rapid-fire texts. As they walked toward the station's exit, Victoria could feel the shift in the atmosphere. The officers who had so casually accepted Blake Thompson's version of events now avoided eye contact, suddenly very interested in their paperwork. Marcus's Tesla was parked haphazardly outside, telling Victoria exactly how quickly he'd driven over after receiving her call. As they settled into the car's leather seats, she could see him mentally cataloging every detail of her appearance, checking for any sign of mistreatment. "I'm fine," she assured him, reaching over to squeeze his hand. "Angry, but fine." "Tell me everything," he said, his fingers tight on the steering wheel. "Every word, every gesture. Leave nothing out." As Victoria recounted the morning's events, she watched Marcus's expression grow darker. She recognized the look in his eyes, the same one he'd worn in high school when he'd discovered the debate team coach had been deliberately excluding him from major competitions. That situation had ended with Marcus not only competing, but winning the state championship after me, meticulously documenting the coach's bias and presenting it to the school board. Elite Motors, Marcus said when she finished, his voice dangerously quiet. Blake Thompson. I know the name. They've had complaints before. Nothing that stuck, of course. The man's careful about documenting everything in a way that looks legitimate on paper. Victoria Nadid, un surprised. He mentioned the security cameras were decorative. A cold smile crossed Marcus's face. Did he? Interesting, considering the building permit filed 3 years ago specifically included a state-of-the-art security system. I handled a case involving the contractor who installed it. This was why they worked so well together. Victoria's instinct for spotting opportunities, combined with Marcus's encyclopedic knowledge of the law and its applications. She taught him to play chess when he was 6, and he'd immediately grasped the concept of thinking several moves ahead. Now, she could almost see the strategies forming in his mind. The other customers, Victoria added. They saw everything. Some seemed uncomfortable with the situation. Marcus was already typing notes into his phone. We'll find them. High-end car dealership, limited customer base during morning hours. Shouldn't be too difficult to identify potential witnesses. He paused, looking at her intently. But first, we need to discuss how we want to handle this. You've built Bennett Financial Group into a powerhouse. A public battle could affect client confidence. Victoria smiled, remembering all the times she'd posed similar questions to Marcus during his childhood, teaching him to consider every angle of a situation. What would you advise, counselor? His answering smile was sharp. Legally, we have multiple angles. False imprisonment, discrimination, defamation. The arrest adds another layer. We can show how systemic bias amplified the initial discrimination. But, he trailed off thinking. But, Victoria prompted, though she suspected she knew where his mind was going. But this could be more than just another lawsuit. This could be a catalyst for real change. Marcus's voice took on the passionate tone that had won over so many juries. Think about it, Mom. How many others has he turned away? How many people have faced this kind of treatment but lack the resources to fight back? We could make this a landmark case. Victoria felt a surge of pride so strong it almost brought tears to her eyes. This was why she'd worked those endless hours, why she'd pushed through exhaustion and doubt and discrimination, to raise a son who understood that success came with responsibility. It won't be easy, she cautioned, playing devil's advocate as she had during their dinner table debates. Blake Thompson has connections. The luxury car industry is tight-knit. They'll close ranks. Marcus's laugh was cold. Good. Let them. The tighter they close ranks, the more obvious the pattern becomes. And Mom, he turned to face her fully. We're not exactly without resources ourselves. You've built relationships with half the business leaders in this city. I've got contacts in every major law firm and media outlet. They want to play hardball? Let's show them how it's done. Victoria leaned back in her seat, considering. She thought of the young woman she'd been, studying accounting books by candlelight when the electricity had been cut off. She thought of all the others out there, fighting their own battles against prejudice and presumption. We'll need to be strategic, she said finally. This isn't just about punishing Blake Thompson. It's about creating lasting change. Marcus nodded, already shifting into planning mode. First step, we document everything while it's fresh. Then we start building our network. I know at least 3 reporters who would love to sink their teeth into this story. We'll need to coordinate the media coverage carefully, build pressure without appearing vindictive. We should also look into establishing a foundation, Victoria added, the idea taking shape as she spoke. Something to provide legal support for others who face discrimination in commercial spaces. Make this bigger than just one incident. They spent the next hour in the parked car, plotting and planning, their voices rising and falling as they built strategy upon strategy. Victoria watched her son in his element, seeing echoes of her own determination reflected in his intense focus. She taught him to channel anger into action, to fight injustice with intelligence and preparation rather than raw emotion. Now, those lessons were bearing fruit in ways she couldn't have imagined. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, casting long shadows across the police station parking lot, Victoria felt her earlier humiliation transforming into something powerful. Blake Thompson had seen a black woman he could dismiss. He hadn't recognized Victoria Bennett, CEO of Bennett Financial Group. He certainly hadn't known about Marcus Bennett, the legal prodigy who'd made a name for himself fighting exactly this kind of discrimination. But he would learn. Oh yes, he would learn. Marcus pulled out his laptop, beginning to draft the initial legal documents. Victoria watched his fingers fly across the keyboard, remembering how she'd saved for months to buy him his first computer. She'd known even then that education and technology would be the keys to his future. Now, those same tools would help them craft a response to injustice that would ripple far beyond one luxury car showroom. The Tesla's climate control hummed softly, creating a cocoon of quiet determination around them. Outside, the city continued its daily rhythm, unaware that in this parked car, a mother and son were planning a campaign that would shake the foundations of polite discrimination in high-end retail spaces. Victoria pulled out her own phone, beginning to make notes for the foundation they discussed. This morning's humiliation would become tomorrow's catalyst for change. Blake Thompson had no idea what he'd started, but he was about to find out exactly what happened when you underestimated a Bennett. Victoria's fingers moved swiftly across her phone screen, decades of business instincts crystallizing into action points. While Marcus drafted legal documents, she was already reaching out to her extensive network, carefully chosen messages that would set larger wheels in motion. Each contact represented a different piece of the complex strategy forming in her mind. First, a text to Diane Chun, editor-in-chief of the Business Chronicle. Lunch tomorrow? Have an interesting story about luxury retail discrimination you might want to hear. Diane had been trying to get an exclusive interview with Victoria for months about Bennett Financial Group's meteoric rise. Now, she'd get her interview, along with something far more newsworthy. Next, she contacted James Wilson, her head of PR. Emergency strategy meeting, 7 a.m. tomorrow. Full team required. James had been with her since the early days, when Bennett Financial Group operated out of a converted storage room. He understood the delicate balance between advocacy and aggression, between making a statement and maintaining professional dignity. Marcus glanced over at her screen, his own fingers never stopping their rapid typing. Mom, we should reach out to Professor Hamilton. Her research on discriminatory practices in luxury retail would add academic weight to our case. Victoria nodded, already composing the email. Dr. Sarah Hamilton had been Marcus's mentor at law school, and her groundbreaking studies on systemic bias in high-end commercial spaces had influenced policy changes across 3 states. Already on it. I'm also thinking we should contact Reverend Jackson's Social Justice Coalition. Good thinking, Marcus murmured, his eyes scanning the preliminary injunction he was drafting. Community support will be crucial. Blake Thompson's probably making calls right now, trying to manage the situation. We need to be 10 steps ahead. Victoria allowed herself a small smile. He's definitely making calls, probably to his country club friends, his golf buddies, anyone who can help him spin this as a misunderstanding. She pulled up another contact, Michael Rivera, who ran the city's largest minority business alliance. But we have our own networks. The Tesla's interior had become a mobile command center, mother and son orchestrating a response that would transform a personal insult into a movement for change. Victoria remembered teaching Marcus chess, explaining how each piece had its role, how victory came from using all your resources in concert. Now they were playing a much larger game, with real-world stakes and the potential for lasting impact. We should consider timing, Marcus said, pausing in his typing. The luxury car show is coming up in 3 weeks. Elite Motors always has a major presence there. Victoria's eyes lit up with recognition. The perfect platform. Blake Thompson glad-handing potential customers while we release the security footage of him having a black woman arrested for trying to buy a car. She paused, considering, assuming we can get that footage. Marcus's smile was predatory. Leave that to me. I've already got a paralegal researching Elite Motors security contractor. And he checked his phone. I've got a meeting tomorrow with 3 former employees who filed workplace discrimination complaints. They were quietly settled, but the paperwork's public record. Pattern and practice. Victoria nodded, corporate law terms flowing easily after years of business litigation. Build a case showing this isn't an isolated incident. They worked in synchronized silence for several minutes, each pursuing their own angles of attack. Victoria had raised Marcus to understand that preparation was everything. Success came from methodically building an unassailable position before making your move. Now, watching him work, she saw those lessons bearing fruit. The foundation, Marcus said suddenly, looking up from his laptop. We need to fast-track it. Make it public before Thompson can try to paint this as a personal vendetta. Victoria was already pulling up her contacts at several prominent charitable organizations. I'm thinking we call it the Commercial Equity Initiative. Focus on providing legal support for victims of retail discrimination, but also education and advocacy. Make it bigger than just luxury car dealerships. Perfect, Marcus nodded. I can have the incorporation papers ready by tomorrow. We'll need a board of directors, respected names, diverse backgrounds, people above reproach. Victoria scrolled through her mental Rolodex. Judge Martinez would be perfect for chairman. She's retiring next month and has always been passionate about civil rights. Dr. Chun from the business school, he's done extensive research on discriminatory lending practices. Rebecca Goldman from the Women's Leadership Council. Add Professor Hamilton, Marcus suggested. And maybe Richard Washington, he was my civil rights law professor, now runs the biggest pro bono legal clinic in the state. The foundation was taking shape in Victoria's mind, not just a response to one incident, but a vehicle for systemic change. She thought of all the times she'd been followed in high-end stores, all the suspicious looks and subtle dismissals. Blake Thompson had simply been more blatant about it. We'll need office space, she mused. Something prestigious, but not ostentatious. Show we're serious, but not wasteful with donor funds. Marcus was already pulling up real estate listings on his tablet. There's a restored brownstone available in the legal district. Good optics, historical significance, close to the courts, plenty of space for staff and client meetings. Victoria leaned over to look at the listing, her shoulder brushing against her son's. The moment brewed. HT back memories of helping him with homework, both of them bent over textbooks at their tiny kitchen table. She'd always stressed the importance of thorough research, of building an airtight case, whether for a school project or a business proposal. Now those same skills would help them craft a response that would reshape the landscape of luxury retail. We'll need to be careful with the media strategy, Marcus said, voicing the concern Victoria had been considering. Thompson will try to paint us as wealthy elites with a grudge. We need to keep the focus on the larger issue. Agreed. Victoria pulled up the draft of her message to Diane Shin, refining the language. We start with a personal story. It's compelling, immediate. But we quickly expand to show the broader pattern. Statistics on discrimination in high-end retail, expert testimony, other victims coming forward. Marcus nodded, adding notes to his own document. We should reach out to civil rights organizations, but let them approach us. More powerful if they independently recognize the significance of the case. They were interrupted by a text message arriving simultaneously on both their phones. James Wilson had already started mobilizing the PR team. Victoria read his preliminary media strategy with approval. James understood the delicate balance they needed to strike. Righteous but not self-righteous, powerful but not vindictive. Thompson's going to try to settle, Marcus predicted, running a hand through his short-cropped hair. Probably with a non-disclosure agreement. Standard playbook for these situations. Victoria's laugh was soft but determined. He doesn't understand what he's dealing with. This isn't about money. This is about making sure no one else has to experience what happened this morning. She looked at her son, seeing in his focused expression the same fire that had driven her to build something from nothing. They were no longer just mother and son in this moment. They were partners in a cause, combining their different strengths toward a common goal. The sun had risen higher, casting sharp shadows across the police station parking lot. In other circumstances, Victoria would have been in her office by now, reviewing investment portfolios and meeting with clients. Instead, She was plotting a campaign that would force the luxury retail world to confront its ugly underbelly of discrimination. Marcus's phone buzzed, his law firm partners responding to his emergency notification. "They're giving me carte blanche," he reported. "Full resources of the firm, whatever I need." Thompson's made enemies in the legal community too, apparently. Victoria wasn't surprised. Men like Blake Thompson tended to leave a wake of resentment behind them. People who'd smile to their faces while waiting for a chance at revenge. She had no intention of depending on such allies. Their motivation was too uncertain, their loyalty too questionable. No, this would be built on stronger foundations. Carefully gathered evidence, meticulously documented patterns of behavior, and a strategic approach that would leave no room for dismissal or denial. Blake Thompson had spent years hiding his discrimination behind a veneer of business practices. They would strip that veneer away, exposing the rot beneath. "We should head to the office," Marcus said finally, saving his documents to the cloud. "We can set up in the conference room, start bringing in the team." Victoria nodded, but paused before he could start the car. "Marcus," she said softly, waiting until he met her eyes. "I'm proud of you, not just for coming to help me today, but for understanding what this needs to become." His expression softened slightly, the determined lawyer becoming for a moment the boy who'd watched his mother fight battle after battle. "I learned from the best," he said simply. "You always taught me that real change requires more than just winning. It requires transforming the battlefield itself." Victoria smiled, remembering countless dinner table conversations about justice and responsibility, about the obligation of the successful to create pathways for others. Those lessons had taken root in fertile soil, growing into something stronger than she could have imagined. The Tesla's electric motor hummed to life, nearly silent, a sharp contrast to the noise they were about to unleash in the world of luxury retail. As they pulled out of the parking lot, Victoria's phone buzzed with responses to her initial messages. The pieces were already falling into place, a complex web of relationships and resources activating in response to her calls. Blake Thompson probably thought he was having a bad morning. He had no idea that his day was about to get much, much worse. But more importantly, he had no idea that his actions would catalyze a movement that would extend far beyond one showroom or one incident.